Hello everyone. I wanted to make a video to touch on the topic of people don't want to work anymore. That's something I've heard a lot in my industry in the electrical trade, especially aimed at the younger generations. So I thought I would kind of give my thoughts and opinions on that. Before I get started, I just want to say that I'm of the opinion that the world is complicated and people are complicated, so I don't think that there's such thing as a simple solution or a simple summary to this problem of this concept of people don't want to work anymore. So with that, just kind of take this with a grain of salt. And if you have your own opinions or anything you want to add, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Okay, so where I first got kind of interested in this topic was from teaching some apprentice electricians in class last summer. I had a guy that I really enjoyed having in class who was 19 years old, and he was saying, I really hate my generation. We are just lazy and entitled and they don't want to work, and I wish I was in a different generation. And I'm over 10 years older than this guy was, so we're close in age, but there's still a little bit of the generation gap where I suppose I'd be classified as more of a millennial, where he'd be classified more so as Gen Z. And I kind of said to him like this, I'm just like, well, look, man, is it that people don't want to work anymore, or are they just more conscious about being a chump? He didn't really know what I meant by that, and I explained it to him. I said, well, let me put it to you like this. The hardest job I ever worked was at a grocery store. I started working as a bag boy and then got promoted to being a cashier, and then stocking shelves, and then the service desk, and then back-end manager, front-end manager. I had people my parents' age asking me to use the bathroom. I would have to call the police if people get into a fight or steal something. And from those 4 or 5 promotions I got in cross training, I made an extra maybe like 30 or 40 cents an hour back in those days. I remember they would call you. They'd be like, we're going to bring you in. We're going to train you into this new promotion, and that comes with a raise. So just watch on your paycheck. You'd be like, all right, I got a raise. I'm working hard. And then you'd see there'd be like 5 cents would be your raise. 10 cents or something. And I think that part of this phenomenon of people don't want to work anymore comes down to that kind of concept, where maybe in the previous generations we just kind of did what we were told, right? I mean, it was just the expectation. You just go to work, you work hard for the boss, and then you expect it to pay off someday, or you expect maybe the boss is going to say, you know what, you earned it, kid, and then promote you to manager. Maybe some places that still happens, but these days, I think especially, we have really been shown in the workforce that loyalty isn't really as important anymore. Putting in your time over decades at a certain employer probably isn't the best route to go. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but your boss or your business owner you work for isn't really incentivized to have you advance in your career if it means turning you into competition to them. Just think about it. Why would you turn one of your worker bees into one of your competitors? That doesn't make any sense from a business standpoint. So they're always going to encourage you enough to work for them, but as long as that means you continue to work for them, they're happy with whatever you want to do. They're never going to want you to break out and do your own thing. I think the younger generations might be a little bit more conscious about the game. I'm not talking about a specific game here. I'm talking about the game, right? The game. That's probably because of the information age. I mean, you have all these people on YouTube or whatever social media coming at you saying this is the side hustle you need to make $1 million, or this is how I sold cardboard boxes and made $10 million in 3 months, or whatever the videos are. And then you're going to your fast food job, working really hard, and then getting paid $13 or whatever. Then you see these people and you kind of are a little bit more conscious of there are people out there that are playing the game and winning, and then you feel like you're playing the game and losing. And I think that feeling of being a loser is associated with working. And I think that the younger generation views themselves as a loser if they're working in a situation like that. I don't think they find dignity being in that situation. I think there's been a shift in the workforce where people as labor or as workers are starting to view themselves more like a business. A business, I mean, they're going to position themselves to win. They're not going to get too sensitive and emotional about a lot of things. If they see a different city that they can make double their money and it's a nearby city and it's easy to move to, they're going to go over there. If you're on a border state like I am, and a business sees a tax incentive about moving their business from one state across the river to the other state, they're going to move to get that tax break. So a business is going to position themselves to win. They're not going to think about you and your little kids and your family you're supporting when they lay you off if there's no work or whatever the situation is. They're going to position themselves to win. And I think traditionally workers were grateful for their job. They thought it was a fortunate thing. I mean, if you look at like the Great Depression, people were lining up to risk their lives to build the Hoover Dam, for instance, and people would die on that job, and death was a part of the construction bid. It was a part of the original bid, and they were grateful and they were excited to be able to have the opportunity to work, to risk their lives to earn a living. That's just not where we're at today. So now workers are viewing themselves like a business where I want to position myself to win. So if you're working for a company, you have a better opportunity elsewhere, you're going to quit and take that better opportunity. And I think there's a lot more movement that way now, where I see, some of the more successful people I know that don't work for themselves and work for other people. Typically they quit their job every 3 years and go somewhere else because they're constantly looking for the better opportunity. And they take that better opportunity when it arises, and they don't sleep on it, and they don't think, well, this company's done good by me and I've been a loyal worker. And no, that's not where the younger generation approaches that situation. They're going to position themselves to win. They're mirroring back what the business owners do. All right, so that's kind of more on the siding with the younger generation about why people don't want to work anymore. Kind of flip the script a little bit and outline some of the truth that maybe the older generations say about this topic of people not wanting to work anymore. And that is, people are certainly more soft and ungrateful now compared to when they were in the past. I think about people having a panic attack, having to go to work in the morning because they don't want to go, or they feel nervous that somebody's going to talk to them and say something. I think about that opposed to, like the 13-year-old Civil War soldiers or the 18, 19-year-olds jumping out of airplanes during the World Wars. And it's just kind of a contrast to how soft we've gotten as a generation, which there is some silver lining in that. That's kind of saying that we have such a good standard of living and we've come so far as a society that we're so privileged that we get to be bored and come up with all this leisure time to spend it getting in our own heads and psyching ourselves out, which in a roundabout way is kind of a good thing, opposed to just not having any time. You're just thinking about work and survival all the time. But what that does is it certainly by default creates weakness, and that's not something that is the fault of the younger generations necessarily. It's just a natural progression, I think, of a civilized culture, maybe, that you get more soft as you have more higher quality of life. But yeah, when the older generations say that, these kids are soft and they're sensitive, they're ungrateful for what they have, that's true. I mean, that's probably true, right? For the most part, that people now really don't know how bad things can get. If you think about even history class in high school is like, why do I got to learn about all these stupid wars and all these genocides and all this stuff that has nothing to do with me? And then they teach history as if it can't happen again. That's wrong. I mean, things can get a lot worse than they are right now. And I think it is always a great attitude to be constantly grateful for what you have. And I know I certainly am. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm definitely more soft, obviously, than, let's say, the World War II generation. Another point I want to make about how people don't want to work anymore is I feel like our society is mostly focused around external motivations and envy. I think that people really aren't internally motivated, so I don't think there's a whole lot of young people on average that have just this vision, this tunnel focus of this bigger picture, this 5 years from now I want to be in this progression in my career, or I'm going to keep my nose down and work my way up as far as learning a skill. Once again, coming from the electrical trade, they don't want to be an apprentice for 4 years and have to be the bottom rank of their crew or something like that. because there's nothing appealing or attractive, nothing you can brag about doing that, right? I mean, you can brag about when you find success, but you can't brag about the process of going through it. And you kind of look like a fool as you're attempting something, especially for several years, when you're not validated yet. And then all of a sudden you get validated, and then people come at you, oh wow, you really knew what you were doing. But that's not how they talk to you while you're in the process of getting there. Unless like they're your wife or your husband or your mom or something, they're probably putting you down the entire time because they don't want you to do better. They don't want you to do better than they are, at least. You can do as good as them, but they don't want you to do better. So as you're dreaming and as you're working towards your goals and you haven't realized those goals yet, the whole time they're going to be stepping on you. And then once you get to that point and you achieve your goal, then all of a sudden they're like, wow, you know what you were doing this whole time. Good for you. And with that external motivation, if you can't brag about it, if you can't show everybody on social media that you're doing great, I think people aren't as willing to start at the bottom and work their way up compared to the previous generations, because there wasn't that pressure online to compete with all these other individuals. Which I don't want to beat a dead horse about that, because I think the literature on the dangers of social media or the impact of social media is already pretty well studied at this point, so I think that isn't news to anybody. But I think it's worth noting, if you're an older person looking at why don't these young people want to work anymore, just think about it, that from their perspective, they feel like a loser having to start at the bottom of something. They don't feel that there's much clout, I guess, in being the apprentice. They want to be the master. In closing, I've kind of touched on a few different kind of thoughts that have come into my head about this conversation. I mean, I've had this conversation with people for, the last 12 years since I've been involved in this industry, as far as people don't want to work anymore, because I heard it back then too. But it's been especially more loud, people talking about that ever since the pandemic. Just all the people quitting their jobs and not going back to work. And everybody's like, why aren't they going back to work? And, you piece it together, it isn't as simple as they just don't want to work. The word on the street being, high inflation, planets on fire, there's these wars, the real estate market ballooned out of control. It's a lot harder to own a home or to buy a home, and maybe you save up all this money and you go to the mortgage lender and you figure out what you can afford, and you figure out it's nowhere near what you thought it would be because of just the interest rates or whatever. So I think in general, people see how hard it is to achieve what they want, and they get psyched out and they say, you can't fire me, I quit. So as far as any kind of solutions or any kind of solace I can offer, I would say that if you are a person who is successful and has a good job or a good career, I would say trying to lead by example, by being generous with some of that knowledge, being generous with some of that advice. Be conscious of that. It might not be that they don't want to work. It might be that they are worried about being a chump. Yeah. Let me know if you have any thoughts on this topic, or if you think I was completely out of line with anything. Feel free to comment down below. If you have any other ideas for some videos for me to cover, feel free to drop a line on that as well. Thanks for watching.